Thank you all for joining. My name is Debbie Wey. I'm Vice President of MLS Administration for Canopy MLS. And today's presentation is about the new product builders update that we are offering, and also an overview of our new construction policies. So just a couple of slides that I want to go through about builders update before I turn it over to Bryan Perkins, Broker Relations Manager. And so we have launched a new construction search tool, buildersupdate.com, that gives agents and consumers a more comprehensive inventory of new home construction. So hopefully you all saw the announcements that we had on Matrix, that we've put in e-headlines over the past couple of weeks. And it is an easy to use tool. And what it does is it collects and presents listing data for new homes, and also not just for inventory homes. It could be to-be built homes, and allows custom builders to be part of the platform, and it can also be used for new construction condos. It also has a feature called New Home Spotlight. That is a lead generation tool that agents can use to present themselves, as a new home expert, and that gives their buyer clients the ability to be able to do searches in Builders Update as well. In conjunction with the agent, they'll be partnered up with an agent before they get the ability to do those searches for the new home construction. And it allows you to be able to use that tool for your buyer prospects. You can have your agent logo there, your picture, your contact information, all as part of that. And then we have also used this Builders Update product, and it replaces what we used to have called New Home Connection that was on realtors.com, or Carolina Realtors. I'm saying it wrong. CarolinaRealtors.com. So you can, you'll have access to it there as well. And if you are working with a builder, or like as the listing broker for a builder, or you are a builder and you want to know more about promoting your product through Builders Update, if you just go to buildersupdate.com and then click on the link for the builder portal, then you'll be able to find all of the information about that. So hang on just a second. And my associate Dana is not able to get into the webinar. So I'm going to have her, Bryan, if you could reach out to Dana and send her a link to be able to log into the webinar, I would really appreciate that.
Will do. Thank
you. Okay, so the next slide, I just want to let you know how it's going with Builders Update. We've been really excited about the adoption so far. So far, we've had over 3,000 agents logging in to the platform. That's 2,115 unique logins, and over 1,370 have subscribed to what they call their newsletter, so that they'll be getting email updates about new product, new builders logging into or using the Builders Update platform. And then the total number of spotlights, so 70 agents have set up that New Home Spotlight on their agent website, and so they're taking advantage of that lead generation tool. Currently, we have 14 unique builders in the areas that we serve who are using Builders Update. And that number is growing, so we're really happy about that. And that equates to 105 new home communities with 229 what we call quick move-ins, which would kind of be like your, I think your spec homes, and then the to-be built, that equates to 522 of those. So I know we're in this tight inventory market, but this does generate and provide kind of that extra new construction inventory for agents to be able to look at as well. So one of the features of Builders Update that we want to just sort of highlight is this buyer pre-registration tool. And what that does is it gives it helps to increase the communication between the agents who are representing the buyers and the builders. And that can help reduce those possible conflicts that sometimes occur. And how it works is buildersupdate.com requires the buyer to select an agent before they get the ability to look at those new construction listings. And it's really easy for your buyers to pre-register on buildersupdate.com. And then once they do that, the process starts with the agent and buyer connecting on buildersupdate.com. And then when the buyer finds a home with the builder, and that builder consents to the buyer pre-registration, even before that meeting that buyer in person. So that's where that communication comes in, right? And everybody's kind of on the same page as far as the connection between that buyer and the agents who is representing them, before they go out to see the builder. So there's a couple of things here that we kind of want to bring up. Why would a builder want to use Builders Update as opposed to the MLS? And one reason why is because maybe that builder doesn't like putting all of their inventory into the MLS and accruing those days on market, especially while they're in the construction process, right? So or maybe they don't want to use the coming soon status for new construction. Sometimes that's not a great option. So Builders Update gives them the ability to advertise that community without having that specific listing like you would be required to have if you're using the MLS. So that's one reason. But keep in mind that Builders Update is not the MLS, right? And the buyer registration process through Builders Update, it may not be the same as a buyer registration process that the specific builders might be using. So if a builder is saying something like you have to pre-register and use our process for that, they're allowed to do that. There's nothing in the rules that prohibits them from doing that. So you'll want to follow their instructions as well too, but there might not be that in certain cases. And so this buyer pre-registration tool can help in those situations as far as, providing a platform for that communication. Because the last thing anybody really wants to do is put a buyer in the middle of a conflict, right? And it can be difficult for an agent if they have a client that goes to a builder and the builder tells that client, well, because your agent's not here, they're not going to be part of the transaction. So this product can help with that, if everybody is using the communication tools, which is what we hope will eventually happen. And builders will want to do this because one of the most effective ways to find qualified buyers is through working with agents, right? And using this buyer registration tool allows those clients to go home shopping on days when the agent may have other commitments. And yet that agent can still remain part of the process because, this helps do that groundwork for that communication. So it gives the real estate agents a certain comfort level in referring their clients to the builders, because if that buyer is pre-registered, it helps eliminate any of those misunderstandings that can occur. Plus, it helps speed up the building of those relationships. So that is what we are going for here. Now, as far as your Builders Update training, we have created a resource page in our knowledge base. So if you are logged into Matrix and you click on the link for help and just search for the word Builders Update, it'll bring up this article that we've written. And in that article, you'll see links to different resources, FAQs, things like that. But there is also a link to where you can go for agent training. Builders Update is doing their own training. And I would highly recommend that you attend one of those webinars. They're real short, only 30 minutes, but they give a very good description of how the product works. And then finally, the last thing that I'm going to say before I hand it over to Bryan is Builder's Update is not a substitute for a listing in the MLS, right? So, I mean, what we were talking about before, there might be reasons why a builder would want to use Builder's Update. Maybe if they're marketing a specific community and they don't want to have to input all of the listings for every lot or, possible unit that could be built out there. And that makes sense, but it's not a substitute for the MLS. And agents, they're the ones who are providing that local market expertise and making recommendations about marketing services. Builder's Update can augment that. And we've partnered with Builder's Update, to help also augment the existing inventory of new and to be built homes that we have in the MLS. So it's kind of bringing another layer to the agents of a place to look where you can find, additional inventory. The other thing about Builder's Update is that it does not collect sales data. So, when the builders or the agents are putting that information into Builder's Update, it's for marketing, and but they're not reporting closed sales or anything like that through Builder's Update. So the MLS and your tax records are still going to be the best source for that new construction sales data. The other thing, and what I'm going to talk about more when it gets to back to my part, is our comp sale functionality is also going to help with this. So if there is new construction sales that are not being reported, agents have the ability to report that if you're representing the buyer. And we'll go into more detail on that in just a few minutes. So, but Bryan, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that you can take it away and give a little bit more information about Builder's Update.
Thank you. So Dana is still having problems getting in, so maybe you can work on that while I'm doing my part.
Okay.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming in and for this great topic on new construction. My part of this is going to be to just give you guys a quick version of the training you can get from Builder's Update, and I'll point to where you can find that here in just a moment. First, how do we find Builder's Update? It's part of your matrix system in several different places. Those of you that are used to the Realtor Tools widget, where you might find Realtor's Property Resource or any of those other tools that we have, you're going to find Builder's Update there, third from the top, so you can access from there. The other place you might be landing with logins might be our Canopy MLS dashboard. And if that's the case, you'll access Builder's Update from their logo right here. If you have yet to create an account, when you go into Builder's Update, you will be using the email address that you have on record with Canopy MLS. All of you have been invited and have an email somewhere that you received several weeks ago, but you don't need that to have access, as your email address is your ticket into Builder's Update to register as a Canopy member. Once you've logged in, it should keep you logged in as long as you're using the site. Worst case, you'll save your credentials on the browser and it will log you in from there. Same will be true with the consumer side as well. So when you access Builder's Update, which we'll do now, again, it will log you in automatically. It will give you kind of a global perspective of where the new construction is. A lot of times this will leave you on the map where you left the last time. The first thing I want to point out is the fact that your map is going to be a really, again, high profile and a good way to kind of look at where the new inventory is. And I actually prefer the search as I move the map option here at the top, as opposed to a city or some other location criteria that you would enter here, where Charlotte or Gastonia are located right now. That way, whenever you move the map, whether you're in Charlotte or whether you're in Hendersonville or Asheville, it's going to just adjust those numbers based on what can be seen within the window. You can later add a city. You can turn off the map-based searching once you're kind of got the location that you want. You can also, once you've done that, narrow down a little closer by using either a polygon or a radius here at the top to define your area that you want to search in. And so just like you would in most of our platforms, you'll use a map-based searching tool to create that shape and then apply that to your search, along with other criteria, such as the types of new construction you want to access right here on the left, as well as price ranges. When you're entering prices, you're going to be either entering a range or a value plus or minus. The good news about that is it's very consistent with Matrix, except for in some cases you will have to add the zeros. In this case, you don't. So just like in Matrix, if you want to search 5,000 or 500,000 and below, it's 500 and then a minus. So very consistent with our current functionality in our main platform. You've also got bedrooms and bathrooms that would follow that same functionality. Put a dash between them if you want a range, or a plus or a minus if you want greater than or less than. Once you pulled up properties, notice that you do have the ability to either search for custom builders, which currently we do not have in our platform. Hopefully we will soon. This is a work in progress and will build throughout time. So don't be discouraged by that. Just continue to look back until those begin to exist. I just lost my search there, but we'll just continue on with these results over here. Some other options you have here would be to email any number of these properties by selecting individually or all of the listings to email. Notice that you have an agent version that you could send to maybe yourself or to another agent. You also have a buyer version that would be sanitized. And of course, you can send it up to 2 recipients here, and you can also leave a message there for that. To get to the details of a property, click on the details button. That will open up a new screen. Can you confirm, Debbie, that you can see that screen, the detail?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Okay, I got to switch the share. This is a really weird one on the Google here. Let's see. How about that?
Nope. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that would be the details screen. So just know whenever you click on the see details, it's going to take you here where you can do some actions like, again, saving that, emailing it, printing, or simply mapping it. And of course, there's hot links to other things like the community itself, the builder, floor plans, maps, and also community information when available, and some abilities to communicate with the builder, get the floor plan virtual tour. And then also, this is where when builders begin to allow for registration of your buyers, you will see a register buyer option for that particular builder in this area here, as well as across the top here. We don't have any builders currently that have engaged with that. So most of your connection to the builders should be through communicating with them by asking the builder or finding one of the contacts to the builder here below. But again, you'll soon see some that say register buyer, which would mean that you could register that buyer to let that builder know that that is your buyer and that they're going to be coming to look possibly at that community represented by you. I'm going to close this one out. That's the detail. And I'm going to go back and share again my right screen here. Where we go? Okay, and share again. Again, you have that buyer registration button here. Again, if available, it would be lit up so you could register a buyer. When you register a buyer, they do have to be someone that you've added as a buyer into your platform, which I'll show you how to do momentarily. And then again, you can communicate with the builder by clicking on the Ask a Builder, the builder button there to the right. When you go to the save option here at the top, when you're selected properties, this will allow you to save properties in either a buyer folder. And for this, you would select the buyer that you've created. You could also put those in your own cart, and you could put it in both if you wanted. Your cart is going to be here at the top right. I'll show you that in just a moment. And then you can also, if you didn't have the buyer in this list, quickly create a new buyer with a first, last, and email. So that's all we ask from them to get them the ability to create an account to log into Builders Update and then be connected to you. We'll actually look at the buyer experience here in just a moment. We're just going to send it to this guy. We're going to save it. Okay. And then you'll notice right away that that cart has some things in it. And we'll go visit that cart in just a minute to see what's stored there and what we can see in that. And then, of course, we have the print option. And when you print, you've got an agent or buyer version, depending on who the audience is. And of course, you can select the components of the what you want to print, pictures, floor plan, expanded detail, or just a brief detail page, and then print. Now, once you've started to use Builder Update and you do want to share this with your clients, the first thing I would recommend would be to enter the profile area and set up your profile. Really simple exercise here of finding a picture that works for you, a logo, which will brand in place of Canopy here. We'll see that in just a moment on the client side. And of course, any information that you want to add as far as your information is concerned, including your brokerage. And this is also where you go to change your password if you wanted to, if you felt like it had been compromised, you could change that there. The next thing, when you want to begin to engage with clients, it would be to go into the tools section and begin to upload your home buyers. And so you do that here under manage and also upload home buyers. So upload is going to be an Excel database that you're going to upload by going out and finding that file and uploading it to the platform. Notice they do have some instructions and also a template, so you make sure all your data is in the correct columns and in the right format for uploading. If you opt for the manual adding of contacts, you can go into manage home buyers and either invite someone to search or manage, and this would be your current contacts where you could also add a new home buyer here. This is also an area where you could upload if you missed it on the My Tools menu as well. So invite to search would be just you adding a new home buyer and inviting them into the platform. And then of course, they would become part of your home buyers list and become active once they've accepted that invitation. And then you can see all the activity they're creating on their side in the form of notes. When they last viewed things, you can make them inactive. Whenever you're finished with them, they would become an inactive home buyer here at the bottom. And then, of course, the requests here at the top are going to be those requests for registration. So you can see those here as well.
Hey, Brian, can I,
Yes.
We got a question that I wanted to see if you know the answer. I think I know, but the question is, when we create a buyer, does the builder have access to that info?
No.
Okay.
Only with the registration.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, also under My Tools, you're going to see the New Home Spotlight. The New Home Spotlight is the ability for you to begin to potentially engage clients from your website by adding a widget to your personal site. So the way this works is you go through and you create a link, which once you've created, you cannot change it. So make sure you're happy with it. I just took the default one there. I'm sorry if somebody wanted that one, it's gone, but you can choose whatever you want there. You can confirm and upload your logo, and that's going to brand the client experience. And then you can also add that picture again for your New Home Spotlight. And then once you've done that, you will have a HTML code emailed or delivered to you that would allow you to plug that into your website. You can also share the URL here if you wish. 24-hour concierges are almost identical to what you all know as an auto email through the Matrix system, except for new construction on the Builders Update website. So this is set up very simply by accessing the setup under 24-hour concierge, naming your search, deciding what inventory you'd like to receive and whether you'd like to receive all inventory or just what's updated since the last time that it ran. You can also decide on current and also to be built if you want one or both of those. You'll need to select a city to search that. If a client wants to, if you want to set up several of these for different cities, you can do that. Also some price and bedroom and bathroom and square footage criteria, as well as schools. I'm just going to do a city here today for this one. You're going to select a frequency of the updates to that client, daily, weekly, or monthly. And to add the client, sorry, this is the frequency to you. So by default, it says concierge to you, but to add the home buyer, simply click the send to home buyer and then pick that home buyer from the list from their email address. and then create that 24-hour concierge, and that client will receive daily updates, and you will as well about that particular search. So I'm going to put in a price, sorry. So that will give you the concierge that's been set up. You can see I've got 2 for this client. I can easily go in and run these searches whenever I want. I can also delete and edit these searches or these concierges when they've run their course. And I can also create a new one from here if I want to. To get back to this manage section, remember that's under My Tools, Concierges, and Manage. If you have saved listings for either clients or in a cart like we did earlier, those are easily accessible under the saved listings option under My Tools. And you can notice here I've got my cart, which has 2 listings in it, and then a cart or a folder for a client that also has saved listings as well. My search here. All right, so now what we want to do is go over to the client side of this builder's update and see kind of the difference. One other thing I want to show you before we go to there are some little quick links in the question mark here. There's some quick, how do I register a buyer? So if I don't know how to do that, I don't remember, it's not really clear. There's that. Just some information about how it's going to increase your earning potential. So some really neat articles and videos here that you might want to watch. If you want to watch the full training facilitated by Builders Update, if you'll go into the Contact Us section, you can also find signups for that here under Sign Up for Free Training. So you can either go to our Happy Fox or here and find that training opportunity. Now, when a client engages with Builder Update, of course, they get an email inviting them to connect. When they do, they're going to be in a site that looks very similar to yours, except notice in the upper left that instead of the Canopy logo, they're getting your branding. Okay. Now, also, get them to sign in here. Also, while they're here, they're going to get limited functionality. Of course, they don't get all the bells and whistles that you get, specifically under My Tools. They get the concierge, so they could set up their own concierge, which is kind of cool. They don't have to wait for you to set up an auto search. You will see that on your side. You'll see not only concierges that you've created, but also that your clients have created. They can access you under the My Agent tab, so they know who you are, and they can find you and search for homes under you. Their profile is limited, but they do have some ability to add some information here if they want. Their searching is pretty similar. They're going to have basically the same criteria. They're going to have their polygons, their radius. They're going to have that search as I move the map option. They're going to have all the criteria fields and then more filters here if they want to search on school districts, communities, or property types. In the details of a property, which is all they get, they're going to see a sanitized view of the property. Remember, always branded to you, their realtor. They can view images, floor plans. But when they go to contact, the contact is to you. You notice that's my email address. That would be my professional email address, or my realtor. Same thing there. So the contact is always with the agent that set them up and not with the builder directly. So again, that was a very short version of what you would get in the full-blown training, but today's session is about more than just Builders Update. This does connect to what Debbie's going to talk about, but I want to give her ample time to go through her presentation because I feel like it is a very valuable part of this whole conversation. So I would like to thank you all for indulging me on this today, and I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie so she can clear path to her presentation. So thank you very much, and everybody have a great day.
Now back to the new construction policies. We had a task force within the past few months composed from members of the MLS advisory group that also included builder representatives. And what we did is looked at our policies to identify areas where there were issues that we needed to resolve as far as how new construction listings are listed in the MLS. And some of the changes that we made were to reflect what the current practices are that go on in the marketplace and areas where our rules were inconsistent with that. We were also looking for ways that we could incentivize submission of new construction comp sales. And we also were looking to clarify when and how and by whom those new construction comp sales could be entered, because there was some confusion that was happening about, well, was the buyer agent supposed to do it? Was the listing agent supposed to do it? So those were areas where we were looking to clarify. So as part of this document that we have called How to List New Construction in Canopy MLS, we talk about why home builders should use the MLS. And, the obvious answer there is for buyers, because agents who participate in the MLS have ready, willing, and able buyers who are basically just a click away, and builders can get more sales by accurately marketing their properties to realtors through the MLS. And so marketing is one of the key reasons why builders would want to have their listings in the MLS. Also, MLS listings, as you know, go to numerous websites like carolinahome.com, realtor.com. Those are some of the syndication sites, plus lots more through ListHub, which is a partnership that we have. ListHub has over 154 participating publishers, and that amounts to more than 750 websites where listing information goes out. So for the MLS participants who've opted into ListHub, those opportunities are there. There are also over 3,400 agent and brokerage websites. Those are your IDX websites that display MLS listings. So add that to that total marketing reach. And then statistics is another reason. We break out all of our new construction versus resale in our statistical reports. Some of you might be familiar with SAM, which stands for Statistical Analysis Module. And so we do break out new construction in those. And so it's great for home builders. If they're members of Canopy, they have access to those statistics through the MLS at any time. And the more home builders that participate and put their listings in the MLS, the more valuable those reports become. So now there are a couple different ways that home builders can get their listings into the MLS. Number one is they can subscribe directly to the MLS if they are licensed real estate brokers. So a lot of them do that. The other way is if they're not a licensed real estate broker or they don't want to participate directly, they can list their properties with Canopy MLS subscribers. So if you have that valid signed listing agreement, that new construction listing can be input into the MLS. Now, so what we're going to talk about for the remainder is how should home builders use the MLS? And basically there are three, main points that we want to cover. Number one is to list properties that are for sale. Number two, to enter those sold properties as comps. And then finally, we're going to talk about some of the different data fields in the MLS and how they relate specifically to new construction. So some of you might be aware, hopefully all of you are aware, that we implemented a new policy in May of 2020 called Clear Cooperation. And the thing to remember about Clear Cooperation as it relates to new construction is that it doesn't apply to new construction. So what the Clear Cooperation policy says is that within one business day of marketing a property to the public, the listing broker must submit the listing to the MLS for cooperation with other MLS participants. So that's basically going to apply to all of your residential listings that are for sale. But then within our MLS rules, we had certain property types that are what we call optional property types. They're not mandatory for submission. And those are your commercial properties, rental properties, auction properties, fractional listings, and new construction that is proposed and under construction. So the clear cooperation policy does not apply to those optional property types. But if there's a listing agreement, so if there's a listing agreement with a participant firm that participates or with a firm that participates in Canopy MLS, and that would include home builders who participate in the MLS directly, then the listing brokerage may submit new construction properties to the MLS that are proposed and under construction that have not received a certificate of occupancy. So that's how clear cooperation applies to new construction. So the word may, you'll see in blue on the screen, is the key word there, and that's what makes it optional. But if a listing agreement for new construction is not set up as a firm exclusive, which is what prohibits dissemination of the listing by Canopy MLS, and the property is not already under contract when the certificate of occupancy is issued, then the property is required to be submitted to the MLS for dissemination to the participants. So here, the two main things are there has to be a signed listing agreement with a firm that participates in Canopy MLS. And once that CO has been issued and it's not a firm exclusive, then that property becomes mandatory for submission to the MLS. I hope that makes sense. But so that's how clear cooperation applies. The other thing is, to remember is that once you input a listing into the MLS, even if it's one of those optional property types, then you're obligated to follow through with that. You're obligated to report status changes and keep the listing updated with complete and accurate information. So, once you make the decision to input a listing, even if it's an optional, then at that point, you're kind of locked in and you have to follow through with all of the status updates. So that would mean that if a home builder who participates directly in the MLS inputs their listings and then has, sometimes what we see is, they want to withdraw the listing rather than report it as closed when it sells. Maybe it sold for a price lower than they thought, was what they wanted for that particular listing. That would be a violation. You can't list a property in the MLS and withdraw it just because you don't want to report the sales information. You have to, follow through and report all of those status changes and report that accurate information. But then it's also a good idea, really, you should want to report that sales information because the lack of that information, especially in the kind of market that we're in right now, can cause appraisal issues. So it's nice if that information is in the MLS. It can create a better situation as far as appraisals and future sales in the neighborhood. So our definition for new construction, we get asked this sometimes, is defined as the certificate of occupancy is no more than 2 years old. The home has never been lived in. It does not include remodeling. And a listing may be entered with a construction status of proposed, under construction, which means it has not yet received the CO. It could be as complete, or it could say land home package. And land home package is a new one that we added for sort of custom built homes where, maybe with like a construction perm loan or something like that, to specifically highlight and flag those for our appraiser members because they sometimes have to treat those a little bit differently. And we'll talk more about those as we get further into the program. So in order to call something new construction, it has to meet this definition. Now, in order to enter sold properties as comps, we're going to walk through some of those policies. And this is where our biggest policy changes were made through this process that we went through over the past couple of months. So as a builder, what you have to consider is, should I input this listing as a new listing, just like every other kind of listing, or should it be a new construction listing agent comp sale? As far as what's going to be input into the MLS. And kind of to reiterate what we talked about before, we definitely encourage home builders to account for 100% of all sales by listing all properties and inputting comps into the MLS. And as I said before, the rule changes that we made were to reflect what's going on as far as current practices, and to incentivize the submission of new construction comp sales, and to clarify when and by whom those comp sales could be entered. And what we actually ended up doing was eliminating a rule and pieces of rules that were confusing and weren't actually reflective of what happens in the marketplace regarding new construction. And the rules were essentially unenforceable. So we had a rule that was, it was called our listing multiple unit properties rule. And it said that the builder or the brokerage could enter multiple unit properties into the MLS as one listing. And when the unit was sold, when an individual unit was sold, the listing brokerage must enter the unit into the MLS for comp purposes. So that seemed to mean that the comp sales were required to be input by the builder. And what was confusing about that was that new construction for us was not a mandatory property type. And so there was a conflict there, right? Like, were they required or were they not required? And so we got rid of that rule. And so the comp sales are optional. The builder and the agents who represent these new construction comp or new construction sales have the option, but it's not mandatory. They have the option to submit those as comp sales in the MLS. And the way that we're incentivizing that is, well, we'll get to that. But before we get to that, the other thing that I want to mention is that builders have two options. So when they have a new construction listing, and it goes under contract before the CO is issued, they could either enter that as a new listing and immediately update it to under contract status, which is what a lot of our builder members will do because they want to show a little bit of time on market. You know, it might be helpful to other agents and to appraisers to see, you know, here are some of the units that are under contract. So it's helpful to other agents to see that information entered into the MLS. But if they choose not to do that, the other alternative is to enter that unit for comparable purposes after it closes. And I kind of want to show you guys where you can find this. Let me see if I still have my, let me get Matrix up here on the screen. So. Okay. So when you're in Add Edit and you're going to input a new listing, here's where you find all of these comp sale forms. So at the top, you've got your regular listing forms. So, you know, ideally they're going to click on single family, input it and update it to under contract. But if they wait until after it closes, then you would choose one of these comp sale forms. And then when you click on that, under the sold comp type over on the right, this is where you have your options. And for new construction, if it's the listing agent, you would select new construction listing agent comp sale and report the comp that way. So that's where you can find that. Pretty simple. But so let's say the builder chooses not to input the listing as a regular new listing, or they decide that they're not going to input the comp sale. So if the listing brokerage does not input a new listing or new construction listing agent comp sale within 5 business days after the closing, then the selling agent has 5 business days to input a selling agent comp sale, and the listing brokerage will receive no credit for the sale. So that's the incentive for the builder to do it. But if they choose not to do it, then the selling agent can input that comp sale. And then the listing brokerage would not get credit. And then, sometimes there might be a concern. And this is one of the things that came out through the task force was that, if there might be a concern from the listing brokerage, maybe it did sell for a lower price than they thought was necessary. Or it could be the opposite. It might have sold for a higher price than is justifiable in the neighborhood. One of the examples was given, like, maybe that buyer said, I want to have the high end countertops. I want to have the high end flooring. I need, certain modifications to be made to the home for, whatever reason. And these things are not things that other buyers in the neighborhood are looking for that would make that property unique. And sometimes that would be a reason why it wouldn't have been reported by the listing brokerage. So if that's the case, and that property has been reported as a selling agent comp sale, and there's a complaint, what we could do is we could remove the name of the builder from the comp sale if it was provided. We can also add a statement to the MLS staff remarks that explains what the concern was about the use of that data as a comp sale. These MLS staff remarks are in the MLS system. They're visible to other agents who might see that information, but they're not provided through all of our different data feeds and things of that nature. So that would be something that we could do. The other thing to be aware of is that we do have what we call our listing edit policy that we rely on when it comes to requests for making changes to listings. And this is what we as staff are allowed to do, that we follow. And when we get requests from a seller or a buyer, like a new homeowner, when they request removal of listing data, which we get from time to time, we are able to accommodate those requests with the permission of the listing brokerage. Or in this case, if it's a selling agent comp sale, we would ask the selling agent if they're still a member. And what we could do is we can change the internet yes/no field to no, and that would eliminate distribution of the listing to third-party websites. We can remove from public display all media except for the primary photo. But there will be no other modification of the listing unless required by court order. And this is an area where we've kind of had to crack down because we were getting a lot of requests to delete listings from homeowners. And, we were doing that to some degree, but that is not good for other agents who need to rely on the MLS data for this information. So we have this policy that we won't do that unless we're being, demanded to do that by a court order. So if there is a situation, and this is going to apply to comp sales too. And prior to us going through this exercise over the past couple of months, we would from time to time to delete a comp sale when requested. But at this point, we're not going to do that anymore. And we're going to treat the comp sales just like we treat all other listing data in the MLS. So we will not delete them unless we're demanded to do that by court order. So, okay.
Hey,
and then
Debbie, can I interrupt you for a second? I got a
Yes.
couple questions, and I know Dana's not here and I'm not the expert, so I want to throw them at you.
That's fine.
That'll work. Okay. So the first one is from Jennifer. A lot of builders have real estate license. Does that require them to list new construction?
So, that's where we're talking about the clear cooperation policy does not apply to new construction. So new construction is optional. It's one of the optional property types for submission to the MLS. If it's before their certificate of occupancy, once the CO is issued, if that property is listed with a participant of Canopy MLS and it's not already under contract, then at that point it would have to be listed.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. So as far as filling in the MLS data fields, we're going to talk about the most common questions that we get with regard to compensation, bonuses, photos, branding. We have a green certification field that is generally going to be most applicable to a new construction, and also about using our 55 and older option in the community features field. So compensation, of course, we get lots of questions about. The MLS rule is that compensation must be expressed as a percentage of the gross sales price or a definite dollar amount. And then offers of compensation made through the MLS are blanket, unilateral, and unconditional. And specifying a condition on the offer of cooperative compensation in the MLS is a violation. So you cannot put conditions on what you're offering through the MLS. And anytime there's a dispute about whether or not a commission was earned, that will be determined by the cooperating broker's performance as the procuring cause of the sale or lease. That's what determines entitlement to the cooperative compensation. So we always refer members to Section 6 of the Canopy MLS rules and regulations. That's the section that deals with compensation. And then also Article 17 of the Realtor Code of Ethics is the section from the Code of Ethics that deals with procuring cause. So anytime there's a question about procuring cause, that's what we're going to rely upon. And then also compensation is based on the sales price that's agreed to in the purchase agreement, unless there's some other agreement between both parties. So that's where you would, or what you would be referring to is the basis for the compensation. But there are some areas where things can deviate. So what I want to mention is that some of the types of violations that we see with regard to compensation kind of goes back to that. It has to be unconditional. So anytime in a listing, if we were to see something that said compensation will be based on the sales price minus seller paid closing costs, sometimes we see that like with bank-owned listings or, there are other scenarios as well, but that would violate this rule because our rule says it has to be based on the gross sales price. Okay. And then if it were to say something like no compensation will be paid to buyers who are real estate licensees, well, that would be a condition. And like, as we said, you can't put conditions on that offer of compensation. So, and there are other types of conditions that we've seen. I know from time to time we'll see in a listing, it'll say something like, buyer agent must, be present with the buyer or the prospective tenant whenever that property is viewed. And that's a condition. You can't put conditions on any offer of compensation. So sometimes we see with new construction listings where the builder will say compensation will be based on the base price. And that is not really a violation because in those situations, as long as you know what that base price is, it's basically the same as a definite dollar amount, right? So if the builder is saying compensation is going to be based on the base price, well, you have to know what that base price is. And we always, say to that the listing broker, then you want to publish what the base price is, either in the public remarks, or you could do that in the agent remarks as well. But you would have to disclose what the base price is if it's not the same as the list price. And a lot of times it won't be the same as the list price because somebody might be listing a property where there are certain upgrades that are going to be included with that. And the list price is not the same as what the base price would be. So that's come up before. As long as the cooperating broker can figure out what they would be paid for their services and bring in a buyer for that property, that's the litmus test of what we're looking for. So you've got to be able to determine what that compensation would be. And then the other thing is, in case of commission disputes, agents can file for mediation or arbitration. And there are lots of factors that make up a procuring cause claim. So there is no one factor that you can hang your hat on, right? Whether you were or you weren't the procuring cause. So who found the property? That's only one factor that comes into play when there is a hearing and procuring cause is what's being determined. So in order to prevail, one would have to prove much more was done than merely introducing a buyer to the property. Every case is different. There's no one easy answer. And we get asked this question a lot. So, and this is where we think Builders Update can help, right? It can help by increasing that communication through the buyer registration tool if our members and our builders are using it. Agents and MLS execs from other markets have said that, you know, they haven't experienced any issues with how that buyer registration process works. So that factored into the decision for Canopy MLS to move forward with Builders Update. So, and then also just one other article of the Code of Ethics that I want to mention is that Article 16 says that realtors acting as buyer or tenant representatives or brokers shall disclose that relationship to the seller, landlord representative, or broker at first contact, and shall provide written confirmation of that disclosure no later than execution of a purchase agreement. So if you are representing a buyer interested in new construction, you know, this article of the code seems to indicate that you need to be disclosing that that relationship with that buyer, you know, at first contact with the seller or the seller's representative. So that's very important. And it also kind of plays into this idea of increasing the communication. So moving on to bonuses, be very careful when you're making an offer of a bonus in the MLS. You always want to indicate whether or not the bonus is negotiable, who is offering the bonus, and whether or not the bonus is contingent upon a full price offer. Unless you are being very clear about what the terms of the bonus are, it'll be treated just like any other offer of compensation that, you know, would be the subject of a potential mediation or arbitration hearing. So you got to be real clear about what the terms of the bonus are in the MLS listing. And then bonuses, we have encouraged that they should match any other promotions that are going on, you know, so you wouldn't want to offer a bonus of a certain amount in the MLS and then have something else, or, you know, maybe that promotion has ended. And if that's the case and the listing wasn't updated, that could create a problem. So you've got to try to make sure you're keeping your listings updated and that those promotions, you know, ideally would match in the MLS versus what you're doing in other venues. So, but the listing brokerages are responsible for upholding what is offered in the MLS. So also digital images is an area where we sometimes have issues with regard to new construction. A photo is required immediately upon saving a listing on active status. So if it's in coming soon status, you don't have to have the photo until it actually is going to switch over to active. But once it's active, a photo is required. The exceptions are for land or if the seller opts out. If a seller does opt out, you want to have that in writing, and it's something that we could request be sent to us, you know, if there is no photo on a listing because the seller has opted out. You can take your own photos or you can contract with a photographer. Either is fine. But the main thing here is you need to make sure that you are respecting copyrights and that you have the proper licensing to use those photos before you upload them into the MLS system. And hopefully all of you have seen that when you submit photos to the MLS, there's actually like a photo acknowledgement that you're required to consent to. So read that sometime, make sure you're, you know, in compliance with the terms of that, because what we want to avoid is any type of copyright infringement claim that could come forward, you know, if you're using a photo that was taken by a professional photographer that you don't have permission to use. So those can be issues sometimes. Also, never copy another agent's photos. We typically don't have that problem with new construction, but we do send some violation notices when we get complaints of that. And for virtual staging, so now this is where new construction sometimes can be affected, is that if a property is being virtually staged, what our policies say is that you can have the virtually staged photo. It has to indicate that it's virtually staged, like superimposed onto the photograph, because just having it in the photo captions is not enough, because there are lots of places on the internet that don't display those photo captions. So it actually has to be superimposed onto the photo that it's virtually staged. And then the other thing is we want a depiction that's not virtually staged. So you would have to have, two photos, the virtually staged version and the non-staged version, if you're going to do virtual staging. And then for new construction, if you're using a photograph that is similar to, but not a photograph of the actual listing, then you also have to have a disclaimer on the photo that says example photo. And that happens a lot. People don't want to, put out a picture of a muddy red lot. They'd rather put a picture out of something that they've built elsewhere that's representative of what is being built. And that's fine, as long as you have example photograph on that photo. We've had situations where agents go out expecting to see a completed house that they're going to show their buyers, and they get there and there's actually nothing built. And had they read the remarks, they probably would have known that it wasn't completely built yet. But we're all working at the speed of as fast as we can, and sometimes people don't read everything in a listing. So, but if they see on the photo it says example photo, then that'll be a clue to them that maybe this isn't a completely built property. So and then as far as branding is concerned, we do have a policy that says that you're not allowed to have any inappropriate branding in your MLS listing. And what that would be is any information that might lead a consumer directly back to the listing agent, the listing brokerage, or the seller. So, and that would apply to the public remarks, the directions, the photos, the photo captions, and the unbranded virtual tours. We do allow branding in the agent remarks, the company remarks. We have a field called syndication remarks that goes out to all of those list hub websites, realtor.com. And then you're also allowed to have your branding in the branded virtual tour field. So we get a lot of pushback on this rule. It's something that we spend a lot of time monitoring for. And we probably get as many reports of this from agents when they identify inappropriate branding in listings as anything else. It's one of the most violated rules that we have. But it's also one of the ones that we get the most, things reported to us about it. So the reason that we have this rule, is because we have tools like One Home, Client Portal, IDX websites. And so I'm going to pick on you, Fran. If I'm on Fran's website, right, and I'm a consumer, I'm a buyer, and I'm looking at listings, Fran got me to her website. And Fran doesn't want to lose me as a prospective buyer. So she doesn't want to have listings on her site that say something like, contact John for showings, right? You wouldn't want that, because you want to keep that prospective buyer. So that's why we have this rule that you can't have any of this inappropriate branding in the fields that the consumers might see if they're in one of these places where they already have an established relationship with a broker. So you can't include any company, agent, or seller contact information in any of those fields that would appear on a customer report, the One Home Client Portal, or through the data that goes out to IDX websites. And if you did, it could be construed as communicating directly with that buyer agent's client, which could jeopardize their buyer agency relationship. So that's why we have these rules. And there's lots of different things that we've interpreted as branding: phone numbers, email addresses, websites that give reference to the listing agent, listing brokerage, or seller. If you have your company or your personal names in the public remarks, that could be an issue. As far as for sale signs go, we want you to take the picture of your listing before you plant that for sale sign in the front yard, because if you can see the name of the listing brokerage in the sign, well, now we know, who the listing brokerage is. Any kind of logos we would not want to see on the pictures, or if there are artist renderings, none of that. We've seen slogans before, added to photographs. On virtual tours, sometimes we've heard theme songs for certain brokerages. We would consider that to be branding. So, and that's just some of it. It's not an exhaustive list. So be careful of that. Basically, your public remarks should be information about the house that's being offered. So if there are any questions about that, always reach out to us, compliance@carolinahome.com, and we're happy to walk you through that. The other thing is go into our knowledge base, search for the word branding, and like all of these policies are in that knowledge base. So that's another great resource where you can see this information. Next is using the 55 and older option for that's in the community features field for qualified senior housing. It's actually kind of the legal name for it is housing for older persons. And there are two types. It could be either a neighborhood that's entirely occupied by persons age 62 and older, or the other, which is more common, is a neighborhood where at least 80% of the units have at least one resident who is 55 or more years of age. So that's the real definition for 55 and older. You cannot misuse 55 and older. You wouldn't want to label a community that might be good for empty nesters, or something like that you think would be appropriate for retirees or something like that, as 55 and older if it's not. And we have seen examples of this. So it could put the MLS in jeopardy. It can put the agent in jeopardy of violating federal fair housing regulations. So it's very important that you only use that option for neighborhoods that are truly 55 and older. We have a 55 and older statement of qualification that we require for any listing that's in a 55 and older neighborhood, or let's say you're an on-site agent for a new home community and the entire community is 55 and older. One of these statements is enough for all of your listings that you have in that neighborhood. Okay. But let's say, I have a listing today in a neighborhood, it sells, and then 2 months later, I get another listing in that neighborhood. At that point, I would have to have another 55 and older statement signed. And the reason why is because these neighborhoods can actually lose their status as 55 and older if it falls below this 80%. So it's up to the homeowner association to ensure that they're enforcing their restrictive covenants. And if they get lax about that and they go below 80%, they can lose that status. So that's why we require this statement of qualification every time. So I know it can be a pain, but it's something that we have to do to protect ourselves. It also helps us protect our members from possible fair housing claims. So very important there. And it has to come from a representative of the HOA. We do ask that it has to be witnessed. It could be witnessed by anyone, but the signature of a representative of the HOA is required on the form. And so if it's a new home community where control of the HOA hasn't been turned over, then a signature of the builder in that scenario would be okay. Or it could be a signature of someone from the management company. We would accept that too, but we just have to have that form. Okay. So now the last thing that I kind of want to get into is custom built homes. These things can be very confusing, and it's something that we updated our policies at the I believe it was the beginning of 2019 to allow for custom built homes to be represented in the MLS. Prior to that, we said that you could only report closed sales in the MLS when the information could be substantiated by either a closing disclosure or a HUD statement, right? And if you didn't have that, then it couldn't be in the MLS, basically. And that was a problem for the members for two reasons. Agents wanted to be able to report the sales price of custom built homes after their certificate of occupancy was issued, which is oftentimes months after the closing actually occurs, right? And what you end up with your the sale price could have been significantly different than what would have been reported on a HUD statement or a closing statement when the lot closed. So that was one issue. And then the other was agents wanted to be able to report custom built construction paid for by cash. You may not have even had a HUD statement or a closing disclosure in some of these scenarios, right? So on the last conference or on the last webinar that we did, I was asked a question at the end: when do you use, and what we're going to talk about is this custom built construction price certification. And the question I was asked is, when do you use that form? And it comes down to these two bullets that are on the screen right now. You use this form if you want to report a sale price after the CO is issued, especially if that's months after the closing actually occurred. So that's scenario one. And then the second is if you want to be able to report a custom built home that was paid for by cash. Okay. So that's when you use this. And that was a good question. And so I wanted to make sure I clarified that. So in 2019, we created this custom built construction price certification. And you use it in a scenario where the seller of the lot and the builder are not the same entity. So a lot of times with custom built homes, you'll have that, right? Like the developer is selling the lot, and then you have a choice of 4 or 5 different builders that you can use to come in and build the new home on the lot. And sometimes those people are not the same entity. So you would use this form in that scenario. Also in that scenario, the thing you have to remember is that when you list a property in the MLS and you offer compensation to a cooperating broker for bringing a buyer, you have to have a listing agreement or some kind of legal document that ties these two events together, the sale of the lot and the construction, right? Because you're on the hook when you make that offer of compensation, that you guarantee that you're going to pay that. So there has to be that legal documentation behind it to support that you're going to be able to do that. So I know there are scenarios out there where a seller says, well, I want to sell my lot, and to make it more marketable, why don't you tie this floor plan from this builder to it? There has to be some kind of legal agreement that ties all of that together. And where we can't kind of go too far in explaining how that works is what that agreement needs to look like. So, some people do it through their listing agreements. Some people, engage an attorney to get them to help them draft a document that ties all of that together, because, agents can't do that. But, and that might be a scenario where if you do a lot of these, you want to go get an attorney to draft something for you that you would be able to use over and over in these types of deals. But that's important that you have a legal document that ties that package together, right? And then if it, appraisers call this a land home construction package. If this is what you're selling or you're marketing in the MLS, the construction status field must indicate land home package. And that way the appraiser knows that they might need to treat this, property a little bit differently as far as using it as a comp. You never want to report a closed sale for the lot separately from the closed sale from the land home construction package. So we don't want double reporting. So if the lot sold, 6 months ago, and that was reported as closed in the MLS, and then now the house has been built on it, the CO has been issued, and the buyer agent or the listing broker wants to report the total package as either a comp or a listing, a closed listing, that's fine, but we don't want to have double reporting of that lot sale. So we may need to withdraw that initial lot listing that was in the MLS so that we can now report this as the total package. You don't want to report a closed sale for the lot. Oh, we talked about that. The custom built construction listing must be reported as under contract by the listing brokerage in the MLS within 2 business days after the purchase agreement for the lot is executed between the buyer and seller. So if it's a scenario where y'all want to go ahead and get the listing in the MLS while it's under contract, you know, our time frames are applicable in this situation. It needs to be done within 2 business days after that purchase agreement is executed between buyer and seller. But here again, we've tried to give a lot of options here. Again, well, never report a listing as closed until after a closing has occurred. You know, hopefully that's pretty obvious. If the CO will be issued within 24 months from the closing on the lot, then the listing can remain in under contract status and then would be reported as closed within 5 business days after the CO is issued. After 24 months have passed, then only the sale price of the lot would be able to be reported. So we had to come up with a time frame, like, you know, we can't be having these kinds of changes occurring in the MLS for years after the lot is sold. So we came up with 24 months. We felt that was a reasonable amount of time. If items are paid for outside of closing, those may be reflected in the closed price only if they are reflected on the HUD or the closing disclosure. The purchase agreement or that final builder invoice. So, and then upon request, MLS staff, we can update a closed price. So if it's a scenario where you as the listing agent or the buyer agent, if you're the listing agent, maybe you report it as closed after the lot sales, right? You get paid your commission after the lot sales. You're not going to be you know, following the process over the course of the next 6 months as the home gets built. It's fine to report it as closed at that point, right? After the lot sells. And then later on down the road, after the CO is issued, if you want to come back and say, well, we reported it as $600,000, but it ended up being 650, we can make that change for you as MLS staff, you know, as long as the documentation supports that. Okay. So keep that in mind. And then the market value could also be reported as a closed price. If the listing if the home was appraised by a licensed or a certified appraiser. So that's an option. Or the other 2 options is it can be the sum of the lot price plus the contract build price. And that would be if you're reporting it as closed after the lot sales, or it could be the sum of the lot price plus the final construction sales price if you're reporting it as closed after the CO. And in those scenarios, you have to attach either a final invoice from the builder, or you would have to attach the final invoice from the builder. And we want this closed, custom built construction certification form to be attached to the listing as well. And the reason why is because on that form, you're showing what the lot sales price is plus the construction price. And that's what's going to be helpful to appraisers and make this information. It's going to give them that level of confidence that it's being supported by agents who were involved in the transaction. So that's the reason why we want that form to be attached. So I know those things can be confusing. We get a lot of questions about them, but if you do find yourself, you know, representing this custom built new construction and you want it reported in the MLS, reach out to us at compliance@carolinahome.com or give us a call, and we are happy to try to point out what any of these nuances are and whether or not you would be able to report it in the MLS. So that does it for me. Bryan, were there any questions that I didn't cover that you think we need to bring up?
There actually were. mostly related to compensation. I'll try to like put them into one question.
Okay.
So concern is about making sure you guarantee compensation. I think the buttoning up of our rules and also builders update are going to be in combination to help that. But there was a question about where they would put, like if they have a base price, are they allowed to put different ranges of prices in the remarks of their listing as long as they don't brand it for a builder or someone representing a builder?
Yeah. They could. I mean, the list price field is going to make them put a specific price. But if in the public remarks you want to say price range, $200,000 to 250 or something like that, depending on your upgrades that your prospective buyer might have, that's fine. But if the question is related back to compensation, it goes back to the offer of compensation is going to be based on the gross sales price. And so if it's a percentage, it has to be either a percentage of the gross sale price or a flat dollar amount. So the cooperating broker needs to be able to determine, well, this is what my compensation would be if I bring a buyer for that property. So you whatever it is that you go by, like they have to be able to determine, like my compensation would be X, right? So as long as they can figure that out from what's being put into the MLS and it's not some nebulous number, then you've met the requirement of the rule. But if you're saying something like it could be, a range from here to here, and that would mean the compensation would be a range from here to here, that won't work. It has to be a specific offer of compensation. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and then there was one other concern. What would be some things to be thinking about where days on market is concerned with new construction? Like as far as like if a builder was to put up new construction, what would be a good time to put it in so that days on market doesn't continue to accrue and look bad on the listing, or vice versa? If somebody's looking at it, what should they assume, or what should be some things that they should be looking at for that?
Well, I mean, days on market is going to accrue for any listing that is in active status, right? So if you're using the coming soon no-show status for new construction, it can be a problem because our rules about coming soon are it cannot be shown, right? So if you have a scenario where there's a model home, that's one thing. But if the listing in the MLS says, if it's on that coming soon no show status, like that particular unit would not be able to be shown to anyone. So, you couldn't allow any prospective buyers to go inside with their agents or anything like that. So, I mean, days on market does not accrue while it's in coming soon no show, but it also can't be shown. So I think sometimes, and it's also only for 21 days is the max. And so for new construction, it's taking months to build that property. So your days on market are going to accrue if it's in active status. So, and there's really no way, I don't have any tips for how to stop the days on market. So unless you put it in temp off market status, but then you're also not marketing the property at that point. So, that might be a reason why you would use Builders Update. You might want to list those properties in the MLS for the ones that maybe you're getting close to ready to issue that CO, or it's in a situation where you think, it's ready to be shown, and you're not worried about the days on market accruing for that listing. But then for your other properties where, maybe they're still just lots or something like that, represent those over on Builders Update. And then, as those lots are ready to be released, or, you're starting to market those more fully, then put them in the MLS. I don't want to tell you how to do. you guys are more the experts in that scenario than I would be. But those are some things to think about.
And then I just think we have one more here. It's about 55 and older. If there's some knowledge of someone being less than thorough on their making sure that the residents are that, but they still call themselves 55 and older, would it be advisable to still call it a 55 and older community in the MLS?
I would not.
Okay.
If there is a suspicion that less than 80% of the residents in the neighborhood are over 55, then I wouldn't call it 55 and older. For sure.
And then this other question, I think this has been answered. Is there a possibility that builders avoid buyer agent after the direct contact with buyers? So that's, again, the whole reason for the builders update tool is that you can register your buyers. You can reach out to the builders beforehand and make sure you set up that relationship. So there's no gray area there.
Right. And
contact.
Brian, the thing that I would add to that is, for properties that are listed in the MLS, you've got your MLS rules that you can fall back on, right? Because they require compensation to be offered, and you've got all of your hearing ethics and arbitration and mediation processes that are going to be applicable to properties that are listed in the MLS. But if the property is not listed in the MLS, then that's where builders update can help by facilitating that communication. But even outside of builders update, this is where as a realtor, you want to ensure that you're following whatever processes that builder has in place, that you're communicating very well with that builder about what your position is as far as representing that buyer client. It's vitally important.
And I got one for me here. Margie asked, in an area of creating concierge service in item 3 select city, how do you add various cities and zip codes? Unfortunately, you can only do one. So like I said earlier, just set up several, like, if you've got several cities you want to monitor for a client, for the concierge or for yourself, just set them up uniquely with those cities and name them accordingly.
All right, everyone. Well, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you for your attention today. And if anything comes up afterwards, just reach out to us on the MLS support. You can give us a call or send us an email, and I'm happy to help answer any questions that might come up.